On stage, they seemed invincible, like superheroes with guitars. But in the end, they were not. The stories you're about to hear involve a dark conflict between bandmates that had a fatal conclusion and a final, heartbreaking choice that became a grim legend. These are the stories that truly shook the world of heavy metal. 1. Cliff Burton. Everyone who knows heavy metal knows the band Metallica. In the early 1980s, they were a young, hungry band that was taking over the world with a new, fast, and aggressive sound. A huge part of that sound was their bass player, Cliff Burton. Cliff wasn't just a bass player who stood in the back. He was a true musician, a genius who played his 4-string bass like a lead guitar. People called him the Jimi Hendrix of the bass. He wore bell-bottom jeans and had a quiet, cool confidence that made him stand out. He was the heart and soul of the band's early albums. In 1986, Metallica was on tour in Europe and becoming one of the biggest bands on the planet. After a show in Sweden, the band got on their tour bus to travel to the next city. The bunks on the bus were small and not very comfortable. To decide who got the best bunk for the night, Cliff and the band's guitarist, Kirk Hammett, drew playing cards. Cliff drew the ace of spades, the highest card, so he won. He pointed at Kirk and said, "I want your bunk." Kirk said okay and went to sleep at the front of the bus. It was a simple, random choice that would change music history forever. In the middle of the night, while everyone was asleep, the bus driver lost control on a patch of black ice. The bus slid off the road and flipped over. During the crash, Cliff was thrown through the window and the bus landed on top of him. He was gone in an instant. The members of Metallica didn't just lose their bandmate, they lost their brother. The world lost a talent that was just beginning to show what he could do. It's a terrifying thought that a life can end because of a patch of ice and the draw of a card. But as shocking as a random accident is, what happens when the tragedy isn't random at all, but happens right in the middle of a concert? The next story is one of the darkest moments in music history. 2. Dimebag Darrell. If you're a fan of heavy guitar riffs, you owe a lot to Dimebag Darrell Abbott. He was the powerhouse guitarist for the band Pantera. Throughout the 1990s, Pantera was one of the biggest and most influential metal bands in the world. Dimebag had a unique sound and a wild, fun-loving personality. He was famous for his squeal guitar solos and his signature pink beard. He was a true original, and every metal guitarist who came after him was influenced by his playing. After Pantera broke up, which was a very messy and public situation, Dimebag and his brother, the drummer Vinnie Paul, started a new band called Damage Plan. They were excited to be making music again and were on tour supporting their first album. On the night of December 8, 2004, they were playing a show at a small club in Columbus, Ohio. The club was packed with fans who were excited to see the legend in person. But just as the band started their first song, a troubled individual from the crowd rushed onto the stage. Before anyone could react, the man unleashed a senseless act of violence. Dimebag Darrell's life was tragically cut short right there on stage, in front of his brother and his fans. It was an event so horrific, so unbelievable, that the entire music world went into a state of shock. It changed concert security forever. The idea that a musician wasn't safe on their own stage sent a chill through every performer and fan. Dimebag's passing was a violent shock that nobody saw coming. But sometimes, the danger isn't in the crowd. Sometimes, it's flying high in the sky with you. And the next story is about a guitar genius whose flight to a festival ended in a fiery nightmare. 3. Randy Rhoads. Before there was Dimebag, another young guitar hero was changing the game. His name was Randy Rhoads. Randy was a small guy with a giant talent. He first got famous playing in the band Quiet Riot, but his life changed forever when he was hired to be the guitarist for Ozzy Osbourne's new solo band. With Ozzy, Randy co-wrote and played on two of the most legendary heavy metal albums of all time, Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. He mixed classical music with heavy metal in a way no one had ever heard before. He was on his way to becoming one of the all-time greats. In March of 1982, the band was on tour in Florida, heading to a festival. They stopped at a property in a town called Leesburg to get some things fixed on their tour bus. The property had a small airport and a few planes. The band's bus driver, who also had a pilot's license, decided it would be fun to take a small plane for a joyride. The first flight had a couple of crew members. On the second flight, Randy Rhoads and the band's makeup artist decided to go up with him. The pilot started flying dangerously low to the ground, trying to buzz the tour bus where the rest of the band, including Ozzy, was sleeping. He made a couple of passes successfully. But on the third pass, the plane's wing clipped the top of the tour bus. The plane spiraled out of control, crashed into a nearby garage, and exploded in a massive fireball. Everyone on board was gone instantly. Randy Rhoads was only 25 years old. Ozzy Osbourne was so devastated that he said he lost one of the best friends he ever had. The loss of Randy Rhoads in such a shocking accident was a massive blow. But sometimes the tragedy isn't a sudden, fiery crash. Sometimes it's a slow and sad fade away, which is what happened to our next iconic voice of a generation. 4. Layne Staley. In the early 1990s, a new sound came out of Seattle, Washington that took over the music world. It was called grunge, and one of its most powerful and haunting voices belonged to Layne Staley, the lead singer of Alice in Chains. Layne's voice was one of a kind. He could sing with a raw, powerful scream one moment, and then create beautiful, dark harmonies the next. The band's music was heavy, gloomy, and deeply emotional, and fans connected with the pain and honesty in Layne's lyrics. Alice in Chains became one of the biggest bands of the era. They had huge hit songs and sold millions of albums. But as the band got more famous, Layne began to struggle. He was fighting a long and difficult battle with his personal demons. The rock and roll lifestyle can be a dangerous trap, and Layne fell into it hard. His unhealthy habits started to affect his ability to perform and record. The band had to cancel tours, and it became clear that their powerful frontman was in serious trouble. For the last few years of his life, Layne became a recluse. He locked himself away in his Seattle apartment, rarely seeing anyone. His friends and family tried to help him, but he couldn't escape the darkness that had surrounded him. In April of 2002, his body was discovered in his home. He had been gone for about 2 weeks before anyone found him. It was a tragic and lonely end for a singer whose voice had touched millions. The rock and roll lifestyle had claimed another incredible talent. Layne's story is a terribly sad one of a slow decline. But our next legend seemed like the opposite. He seemed indestructible, a man who lived harder than anyone and just kept on going until one day he couldn't. 5. Lemmy Kilmister. For over 40 years, Ian Fraser Kilmister, known to the world simply as Lemmy, was the living, breathing spirit of rock and roll. As the frontman, bassist, and lead singer of the band Motorhead, Lemmy was an icon. With his signature mutton chops, his gravelly voice, and his bass guitar held high, he was the definition of cool. Motorhead's music was loud, fast, and aggressive, a blend of punk and metal that influenced nearly every heavy band that came after them. Lemmy was famous for his live fast, die old attitude. He lived a life of pure, unapologetic rock and roll. People used to joke that after the end of the world, the only things left would be cockroaches and Lemmy. He seemed truly indestructible. He toured constantly, played every show with maximum energy, and lived a lifestyle that would have stopped most people decades earlier. He was a force of nature. But even forces of nature can't last forever. In his later years, health problems started to catch up with him, but he refused to stop. He would walk on stage with a cane, but the moment the music started, he was the same old Lemmy. In December of 2015, just 2 days after his 70th birthday, Lemmy learned he had an extremely aggressive form of cancer. The doctors told him he only had a short time left. He didn't want a long, drawn-out battle. He went home, had his favorite video game machine brought to his apartment, and spent his final days with his family. Just 2 days after his diagnosis, he passed away peacefully. It turned out that a lifetime of living on the edge finally presented a bill he couldn't pay. The world was shocked because everyone truly believed Lemmy would live forever. Lemmy's passing felt like the end of an era. Just as iconic, but in a totally different way, was our next star, a singer who battled a different kind of monster and did it with incredible grace. 6. Ronnie James Dio. If there was ever a true gentleman of heavy metal, it was Ronnie James Dio. He was a singer with a voice that was simply magical. It was powerful, epic, and could transport you to a world of rainbows, dragons, and castles. He sang for some of the biggest bands in history, including Rainbow, Black Sabbath after Ozzy left, and his own band, Dio. He is also the person credited with popularizing the devil horns hand gesture, which has become the universal sign for rock and metal all over the world. He said he got it from his Italian grandmother, who used it to ward off evil. Ronnie was beloved by everyone. He was known for being incredibly kind to his fans, spending hours after shows signing autographs and talking to them. He was a small man with a giant voice and an even bigger heart. His music was all about the battle between good and evil and the power of believing in yourself. He was a positive force in a genre that is often seen as dark. In 2009, the metal world was heartbroken to learn that Ronnie had been diagnosed with stomach cancer. But in true Dio fashion, he faced the illness with courage and optimism. He told his fans, "We will win," and began treatment. He continued to work on music and plan for the future. The entire metal community rallied around him, holding benefit concerts and sending messages of support. Everyone was pulling for Ronnie to beat the monster he was fighting. Sadly, despite his brave fight, the cancer was too aggressive. In May of 2010, Ronnie James Dio passed away, surrounded by his family and friends. The loss was immense. A true legend, a voice that defined a generation of metal, was gone. Dio fought a visible battle with a known disease. But our next musician's health problems started in a very strange and unexpected way, from something so small you could barely see it. 7. Jeff Hanneman. Slayer is one of the big four of thrash metal, along with Metallica, Megadeth, and Anthrax. They are known for being the fastest, heaviest, and most intense of them all. A huge part of their terrifying sound came from their guitarist and songwriter, Jeff Hanneman. Jeff wrote some of Slayer's most famous and controversial songs. His guitar solos were chaotic, screaming masterpieces. He was the quiet, reserved member of the band off stage, but a monster on it. In early 2011, Jeff was just hanging out at a friend's house when he was bitten by a spider. At first, he didn't think much of it, but soon his arm began to swell up and he was in incredible pain. He went to the hospital, where doctors told him he had a very serious condition. A flesh-eating bacteria had entered his body through the spider bite and was destroying the tissue in his arm. The doctors had to perform emergency surgery to save his life, and they told him he was lucky he didn't have to have his arm amputated. Jeff began a long and difficult recovery. He had to learn how to walk again and had to go through painful procedures to graft new skin onto his arm. He couldn't play guitar for a long time. The band hired another guitarist to fill in for him on tour, but everyone was hoping and waiting for Jeff to make a full recovery and rejoin the band. He even made a surprise appearance at a Slayer show in 2011 to play a couple of songs, and the crowd went absolutely wild. It seemed like he was on the road to recovery. But the damage from the infection and his past rock and roll lifestyle had taken a serious toll on his body, especially his liver. 2 years after the spider bite, in May of 2013, Jeff Hanneman passed away from liver failure. It was a shocking and bizarre end for one of metal's most important architects. A spider bite is a strange way for a health crisis to begin. Our next story is about another young talent whose journey ended suddenly and tragically, right in his own home. 8. The Reverend. The band Avenged Sevenfold exploded onto the scene in the 2000s with a fresh take on heavy metal. They mixed classic metal sounds with punk energy and modern style. A key ingredient to their unique sound was their drummer, James Owen Sullivan, known to the world as the Rever. The Rev wasn't just a drummer. He was a musical madman. He played with incredible skill and creativity, but he also wrote many of the band's most popular songs and was a key backup vocalist. He was the band's wild, creative spirit. He was known for his goofy sense of humor and his over-the-top personality. On stage and in videos, he was a blur of motion and energy. The band was like a tight-knit family of brothers, and the Rev was the crazy, brilliant heart of the group. They were on top of the world, releasing one-hit album after another and gaining millions of fans. In December of 2009, the music world was completely blindsided. The news broke that the Rev had passed away at his home in Huntington Beach, California. He was only 28 years old. The official report said it was a tragic accident. A combination of things he had taken had a fatal result. His bandmates were completely devastated. They had just been writing a new album together, and now their best friend was gone. Losing the Rev was a massive blow, not just to the band, but to a whole generation of young metal fans who looked up to him. The band decided to carry on, even having one of the Rev's drumming idols, Mike Portnoy, play drums on their next album, Nightmare, which became a tribute to their fallen brother. The Rev's passing was a tragedy that happened behind closed doors. The story of our next musician is tragically similar, a private struggle that ended in a lonely hotel room. 9. Paul Gray. When the band Slipknot first appeared in the late 1990s, the world had never seen anything like them. There were 9 members, all wearing terrifying masks and orange jumpsuits. Their music was a chaotic, brutal, and incredibly powerful explosion of sound. You couldn't tell who was who, which was part of the point. They were a single, monstrous unit. But behind one of those masks was one of the band's creative leaders, the bassist Paul Gray, also known as Number 2 or the Pig. Paul was one of the founding members of Slipknot and was a primary songwriter for the band. He wrote many of their most famous and complex musical pieces. Despite the aggressive music, friends and bandmates described Paul as one of the kindest, warmest, and most loving people you could ever meet. He was the calm, steady center of the 9-man hurricane. He was the glue that held the band together. The band achieved massive worldwide success, but that level of fame can come with intense pressure. Paul had fought personal battles in private for years. In May of 2010, while the band was on a break, Paul was found alone in a hotel room in Iowa. He had lost his private struggle. His passing was an incredible shock. How could this band, this unstoppable force of nature, lose one of its core members? The remaining members of Slipknot held a press conference a few days later. For the first time ever, they appeared in public without their masks, showing their tear-streaked faces to the world. They spoke about their love for their brother Paul and what he meant to the band and to them as people. It was a heartbreaking moment that showed the real human beings behind the scary masks. Paul Gray's passing revealed the hidden pain behind the mask. Our next musician was also known for his imposing image, a gothic giant who joked about his own end before it actually came. 10. Peter Steele. Peter Steele was one of the most unique and imposing figures in all of music. He was the front man for the gothic metal band Type O Negative. Peter was a giant of a man, standing at 6 feet 8 inches tall, with long black hair and a deep vampiric voice. His band's music was slow, heavy, dark, and romantic, but also filled with a cynical, sarcastic sense of humor. Peter wrote lyrics about love, loss, and depression, but he always did it with a wink and a smile. He was famous for his dark and self-deprecating humor. He loved to play pranks on the audience and on music journalists. One of his most famous pranks was in 2005 when the band's website posted an image of a tombstone with his name and the dates 1962 to 2005. Fans panicked, thinking he had passed away. It turned out to be a joke, a reference to the fact that the band was leaving their old record label. It was classic Peter Steele. Because of his dark humor and his long history of battling personal demons, many people weren't sure what to believe when the real news came. In April of 2010, just a few years after his fake passing, rumors began to circulate that Peter Steele had died for real. Many fans thought it was just another one of his elaborate jokes. But sadly, this time it was true. Peter Steele had passed away from heart failure. He was 48 years old. The giant of gothic metal, the man with the booming laugh and the deep voice, was gone. It was a truly ironic and sad ending for a man who always seemed to be laughing at the darkness. Peter Steele's story is a strange one of dark humor becoming a sad reality. Our next two stories are linked by a similar profound sadness involving two of the most powerful voices of their generation who lost their own private wars. 11. Chris Cornell. Chris Cornell had a voice that could shake the heavens. As the frontman for Soundgarden, he was one of the architects of the Seattle grunge movement. His vocal range was incredible. He could let out a powerful, high-pitched scream that could shatter glass and then sing a soft, beautiful melody that could break your heart. Soundgarden's music was heavy, complex, and smart, and Chris's lyrics were like poetry, full of dark and beautiful imagery. After Soundgarden, he went on to have a successful solo career and fronted the supergroup Audioslave with members of Rage Against the Machine. To the outside world, Chris seemed to have it all. He was a rock icon, a handsome and charismatic performer, and a loving husband and father. He was still touring and making incredible music. In May of 2017, Soundgarden played a sold-out show in Detroit. By all accounts, it was a fantastic performance. Chris ended the show by telling the crowd, "I love you." But just hours later, the world was stunned by unbelievable news. Chris Cornell was found in his hotel room. He had lost his fight with an inner sadness that he had battled for much of his life. The world was in shock. How could this happen? He had just been on stage, connecting with thousands of fans. No one saw it coming. The loss of his one-of-a-kind voice left a massive hole in the heart of rock music. It was a devastating reminder that even the biggest stars can be fighting battles we know nothing about. The music world was still reeling from the loss of Chris Cornell when just 2 months later, another tragedy struck that felt like a painful echo. 12. Chester Bennington. Chester Bennington was the voice of a generation for millions of kids who grew up in the 2000s. He was the co-frontman of the band Linkin Park. The band's music was a revolutionary mix of heavy metal, hip-hop, and electronic sounds. At the center of it all was Chester's voice. He could rap and sing soft melodies, but he was most famous for his raw, cathartic scream. It was a scream that was full of pain, anger, and frustration, and it connected deeply with fans who felt like outsiders. The band's first album, Hybrid Theory, is one of the best-selling debut albums of all time. Chester was very open about his struggles. He spoke publicly about a difficult childhood and his long battles with his inner demons and unhealthy habits. He poured all of that pain into his music, and in doing so, he helped millions of his fans feel less alone. He was a close friend of Chris Cornell, and he was hit especially hard by his passing. He even sang a beautiful, heartbreaking version of the song Hallelujah at Chris's funeral, just 2 months after Chris's passing. On what would have been Chris's 53rd birthday, the world received another devastating blow. Chester Bennington was found at his home in California. He too had succumbed to the profound sadness that he had fought for so long. He was only 41 years old. To lose two of rock's most iconic voices in such a similar way, so close together, was an almost unbearable tragedy. It started a much-needed worldwide conversation about mental health and the importance of seeking help. Chester and Chris were modern icons, but our next two stories take us to the icy cold of Scandinavia and into one of the darkest and most infamous chapters in all of metal history. 13. Dead. This next part of our story is very dark and very different from the others. It involves the Norwegian black metal scene of the early 1990s. This scene was meant to be the most extreme, shocking, and anti-everything form of music ever created, and at the center of it was a band called Mayhem. Their singer was a young man from Sweden named Per Yngve Olin, who went by the stage name Dead, and he took his name very, very seriously. Dead was obsessed with all things dark and grim. He was known to wear clothes that he had buried in the ground so they would smell like decay. He wanted to look and feel like a corpse on stage. He was one of the first to wear the corpse paint makeup that became a signature look for the black metal scene. By all accounts, he was a deeply troubled young man who seemed to genuinely hate being alive. His performances were legendary for their intensity and his commitment to creating a truly dark atmosphere. In April of 1991, while living in a house with his bandmates, Dead made a dark and final choice that became part of the band's grim legend. He left behind a short note that famously began with the words, "Excuse all the blood." The story gets even more disturbing from there. When his bandmate, the guitarist known as Urani Mus, found him, his first act was to go buy a camera and take pictures of the scene before calling the police. It was a shocking act that showed just how far the band was willing to push the boundaries of decency. Dead's final act set a dark tone for the entire black metal scene, but the darkness within the band Mayhem was far from over, and it would eventually consume its own leader. 14. Euronymous. After the passing of their singer, Dead, the leader of the band Mayhem was the guitarist, Øystein Arseth, who went by the name Urani Mus. He was the founder of the band and a central figure in the entire Norwegian black metal scene. He owned a record store called Helvet, which means hell in Norwegian, and it became the meeting place for all the young musicians in the scene. He also started his own record label to release their music. Urani Mus had a reputation for being a manipulator. He wanted to create the most evil and dangerous music scene in the world, and he encouraged others to engage in extreme behavior. He used the infamous photos of his deceased bandmate, Dead, as an album cover, which caused a huge controversy even within the dark black metal community. He was building a dangerous empire built on a foundation of negativity and shock value. But as the scene grew more extreme, the conflicts within it grew more intense. Urani Mus got into a serious conflict with another member of the scene who was playing bass in his band at the time. The conflict was about power, respect, and money. The tension grew and grew until it reached a boiling point. In August of 1993, the conflict had a fatal ending. The other musician drove to Urani Mus's apartment in Oslo, and a violent confrontation occurred. Urani Mus's life was ended that night by someone he considered a follower. It was a grim conclusion to a story already steeped in tragedy. The leader of the so-called evil scene was gone, a victim of the very darkness he had helped to create. The Mayhem story is one of internal conflict gone horribly wrong. But thankfully, not all metal stories are that dark. Our next musician was a pioneer who fought a very different, very brave battle. 15. Chuck Schuldiner. While the black metal scene was taking hold in Norway, another new genre of metal was being born in Florida. It was called death metal, and its founding father was a man named Chuck Schuldiner. Chuck was the leader, guitarist, singer, and main songwriter for the band Death. Starting in the mid-1980s, Chuck and his band pushed the boundaries of heavy music, making it faster, more complex, and more intense than ever before. But Chuck was not a one-trick pony. As the years went on, the music of Death became more and more melodic and technical. Chuck was a musical genius who was always evolving and trying new things. He was respected by everyone in the metal community for his incredible guitar skills and his forward-thinking songwriting. He was the godfather of an entire genre, but he never stopped being a student of music. In 1999, at the height of his creative powers, Chuck was diagnosed with a pontine glioma, a rare type of brain tumor. The news was a shock to the metal world. Chuck immediately began treatment, including radiation therapy. The entire metal community rallied around him, holding benefit concerts and auctions to help him pay for his expensive medical bills. Famous musicians from bands like Korn, Slipknot, and Red Hot Chili Peppers all pitched in to help. Chuck fought his illness with incredible courage and dignity for 2 years. He even continued to write and work on music for a new band he had formed called Control Denied. Sadly, despite his brave fight and the support from all over the world, Chuck Schuldiner passed away in December of 2001. He was only 34 years old. He wasn't lost to a rock and roll lifestyle or a freak accident, but to a cruel illness that took him far too soon.